Welcome back to Raf Does Lit. I'm your host, Rafael Fiore. Today we'll be looking at William Butler Yeats' poem, The Circus Animal's Desertion.
I sought a theme, and sought for it in vain. I sought it daily for 6 weeks or so. Maybe at last, being but a broken man, I must be satisfied with my heart. Although winter and summer till old age began, my circus animals were all on show, those stilted boys, that burnished chariot, lion and woman, and the Lord knows what. What can I but enumerate old themes? First, that sea rider Oisin, led by the nose through 3 enchanted islands, allegorical dreams, vain gaiety, vain battle, vain repose, themes of an embittered heart, or so it seems, that might adorn old songs or courtly shows. But what cared I that set him on to ride? I, starved for the bosom of his fairy bride. And then a counter-truth filled out its play. The Countess Kathleen was the name I gave it. She, pity-crazed, had given her soul away, but masterful heaven had intervened to save it. I thought my dear must her own soul destroy, so did fanaticism and hate enslave it. And this brought forth a dream, and soon enough this dream itself had all my thought and love. And when the fool and blind man stole the bread, Cuchulainn fought the ungovernable sea. Heart mysteries there. And yet, when all is said, it was the dream itself enchanted me. Character isolated by a deed, to engross the present and dominate memory. Players and painted stage took all my love, and not those things that they were emblems of. Those masterful images, because complete, grew in pure mind, but out of what began? A mound of refuse or the sweepings of a street. Old kettles, old bottles, and a broken can. Old iron, old bones, old rags, that raving slut who keeps the till. Now that my ladder's gone, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart.
Irish poet and dramatist William Butler Yeats, born on the 13th of June 1865 in Dublin, was one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1923. Throughout his writing career, he wrote romantic, esoteric, and modernist works, which often referenced peaceful Irish independence and his love for Maud Gonne, an Irish nationalist. Published in Last Poems in 1939, The Circus Animal's Desertion was one of the last texts Yeats completed before his death in the same year. The poem is allegorical for Yeats's own life, with the narrator struggling to find inspiration for a poem as his old age has depleted his poetic faculties, causing him to turn to his earlier works in search of motivation only to be appalled by the superficiality his previous works were based on, lamenting that he perhaps created them with the wrong intentions, rather than capturing some essential and deeply significant theme about humanity. Ultimately, it is a complex and moving vision of an aging man reflecting on his life's work and wondering what it all means. The fact that the poem was written when Yeats was 72, nearing the end of his life, and his preoccupation with mortality and the reality of the human condition became prominent themes within his texts are significant in understanding the poem, stating in 1917 that a poet, when he is growing old, will ask himself if he cannot keep his mask and his vision. Thus, the poem can be read as Yeats's search for the truths that remain when all the vanities and illusions of life have been stripped away by the decay of age and the corruptions of time. And it's these themes which make the text modernist, with many even believing it to be an example of early postmodern literature, as it is so concerned with decay and a growing alienation of the individual, with death and the quest for truth being central matters to this poem. The tone of the poem is one of bitterness and even of despair and despondency, conveying a sense of loss while the narrator vainly struggles to find inspiration. However, as the poem develops, the tone changes. While there are still undertones of sadness, the poet also speaks with wisdom, having gained a new understanding of the source of human inspiration. As for the structure of the poem, each stanza is made up of 8 lines of iambic pentameter, with an AB-AB-AB-CC rhyming scheme. This is known as an ottava rima, a poetic structure from the 14th century, traditionally used in epics, which trace the success of heroes through battles and tell tales of great myth, which is ironic as the poem is really about the disillusion and falsities of mythology. It is used to give a stately, meditative structure to Yeats's discussion of the human condition. The poem is broken up into 3 numerical sections, with the first stanza relating to Yeats's preoccupation with aging and his lamentation of his youthful days when he still possessed his poetic faculties. The second verse, where Yeats reviews his early works, questioning their honesty and his commitment to them. And the final stanza, where Yeats discovers the source of human and creative inspiration, the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. An extended metaphor runs throughout the text of the circus animals, which are largely referenced at the end of the first stanza and in the title. These animals symbolises Yeats' early poetic themes, characters, and his overall writing ability, which have now deserted him. These animals, which were all on show, represent the speaker's great dreams and memories that once endowed him with inspiration and joy. The idea that Yeats's old age has taken away his ability to write and think of something new is a notion that runs throughout the poem and links to Yeats's preoccupation with his own mortality. In the first 2 lines, we hear the desperation of the speaker, with the repetition of the phrase, "I sought." This anaphora reinforces the speaker's frantic search for a theme. The poem is also written in the first person, suggesting the poem tells of Yeats's struggle with writer's block, the source of which is suggested to be his old age. The alliteration of "been but a broken man" emphasises the idea that his circumstances have left him incapable of thinking of something new, while the iambic pentameter is broken, underscoring his shattered state of life and the loss of his skill. As the poem continues, Yeats suggests that he must be satisfied with his heart, accepting his previous works for what they were and coming to terms with the fact that his best years are behind him. However, Yeats used enjambment to reveal an element of reflection, and this is where Yeats's lamentation of the past begins. He remembers how his circus animals were all on show when he was younger, reinforcing Yeats's belief that old age had hindered his creative genius. At this point, we begin to see the facade of his past works, with the reader becoming aware that Yeats was also mesmerised by the polished image of his poetry, with its burnished chariots. He failed to recognise the stark reality of the human condition. The poem continues into the second section, with Yeats reviewing 3 of his previous works, vainly searching for the inspiration he had in his younger years, only to discover the flaws of his past works. It's important to note that intertextuality is the medium in which this section operates, hence a clear understanding of Irish myth and Yeats's previous works is required. The first stanza of this section remembers Oisin, an Irish folk legend regarded as the greatest poet of Ireland who was betrayed by time. However, this is not only an allusion to Irish folklore, but to one of Yeats's earliest works, a narrative poem titled The Wanderings of Oisin, in which Oisin details his journey into the realm of faerie, a world of magic, heroism, and timelessness. The speaker references 3 enchanted islands, which are Vain Gaiety, Vain Battle, Vain Repose, all landscapes he traversed through his writing and his imagination while living in the world of these grand myths. Interestingly, he calls these themes of the embittered heart. The poem, therefore, is not simply idealising the past. It admits that there was always some bitterness and some hunger in the human condition, even in the old songs and courtly shows of the romantic past. But in this past, perhaps, stories and myths were used to cover or cloak the fear and emptiness that haunts Yeats, and for a while they worked. He finally reveals his real motivation for writing the poem. The final 2 lines of the stanza are very significant when considering Yeats's interest in mortality, stating, "But what cared I that set him on to ride? I starved for the bosom of his fairy bride." The fairy bride to which Yeats is alluding is Niamh, the wife of Oisin, who lives in the land of faerie, a place where time has no relevance. Considering Yeats's context, these 2 lines could be seen to reference Yeats's longing for youth, which Niamh is able to enjoy, with the bride symbolising something eternal, but unattainable. Moving on, the poet delves deeper into his heart, as a counter-truth reveals itself, with Yeats again discussing one of his other works, the Countess Kathleen. In the play, the Countess sells her soul to the devil in order to feed her kingdom during the times of famine, surprisingly being accepted into heaven due to her selfless act. It is important to note that Maud Gonne, an Irish Republic revolutionary who Yeats was obsessed with all his life, proposing to her 4 times, played the role of Kathleen. Yeats, having believed in the peaceful independence of Ireland, recalls that Maud was corrupted by the fanaticism and hate of the revolution, and believing that Maud had ruined her life by indulging in Irish politics which filled her with hate. However, it seems in spite of these misgivings, he fell for the passionate sacrifices made by his love. Yet, in these final lines, Yeats understands the false image of Maud which captured and enchanted him, as the dream itself consumed him, but now it is dissolving into the nothingness it really always was. However, this stanza can also be interpreted in a slightly different way when considering Yeats's desire to contribute to Ireland's cultural heritage and politics. Having been written at the end of his life, he contemplates his contribution to Ireland, referring to it as "my dear," reflecting how the fanaticism and hate of the Irish Revolution consumed the country. Wanting to achieve peaceful Irish independence, Yeats considers the legacy he left through his Irish politics, only to reveal that he fell in love with the dream of peaceful independence while doing nothing to bring about this desire. The final stanza of the second section again alludes to another one of Yeats's plays, On Bailey Strand, which centres around the mythical hero Cuchulainn, who was tricked into killing his own son. Out of grief, Cuchulainn fights the ungovernable sea, eventually drowning, while the fool and the blind man rob the ovens for bread, failing to realise the tragedy of the event. When analysed under the context of Yeats's own age, it can be interpreted that much like Cuchulainn, he is battling unconquerable enemies, death and old age. As the stanza continues, Yeats reveals that it is the dream of the performance which caught his fancy. It is at the end of the stanza when the speaker returns to his reality, realising these myths and dreams engross the present and dominate memory, as art caused him to disconnect with reality to such an extent that its relevance waned. The sets come down, the lights go off, and he sees the theatre for what it really is, a theatre, a vehicle for performance. He sees that the people and themes he loved so much were always just stories, circus animals playing on a painted stage, enchanting and luminous and unreal. He understands that, much like the fool and the blind man, he didn't see the bigger picture and didn't recognise the tragedy that was unfolding off the stage. He didn't recognise the ugly form of the human condition and society in general. And perhaps he loved these themes because they were unreal, because they were detached from him and so could not be distorted by the truth of the real. So they could not be unmasked by the light of day and shown for all their flaws and humanness. However, he sees that these illusions blinded him to the ugly truth of the world, and it's in this truth that all inspiration stems from. This idea is completely discussed in the final section of the poem, where the speaker thinks back, wondering what set him off on this whole long journey of seeking great themes and living vicariously through hollow, unreal mythologies and fantasies. Yeats takes a hard look at this, utilising hyperphora as he asks where this masterful imagery, which grows in pure mind, actually begins, revealing inspiration to come from the common experience of everyday life. And he doesn't paint a pretty picture of these experiences, highlighting the grittiness of the world, producing images of wretchedness and despondency in the reader's mind as he repeats the word old and broken, perhaps also linking back to his age and emotions. Yeats seems to be implying that all these mythologies began on a mound of refuse or the sweepings of the street, in the lonely chambers of the heart's secret longings and the grittiness of the world. He built them up into glory, but at their core there is nothing but the blankness of a page, the slate of a life into which we are born, upon which we project stories and myths. He thinks that in truth, all these wonderful images really just began from the only thing that ultimately is left to us once all the fires of youth and glory have faded away, the lonely desolation of the heart. But it is this desolation that makes us create better, larger, superhuman worlds out of what small materials we have within us. It's this ruin that lets us hope and dream. In the rag and bone shop of the heart, everyone spins fantasies and dreams. But when it comes down to it, all ends where all begins, and we must return to the humble reality of the simple truth of who we really are. The stark contrast between this final line and the beginning of his earlier poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, truly tracks Yeats's evolution from the romantic writer he was to the modernist writer he became, as he has delved so deep into the heart's core that he has discovered not the beautiful, relaxing, lapping waters of Innisfree, but the grimy mess in which he now lies. Hence, when considering the time at which Yeats wrote this poem, the text can be understood as an analysis of the ways ideals, dreams and fantasies, his circus animals, deserted him, leaving him alone on the stage. Having lived as a poet, dreamer and believer in various causes, he realizes that these were only hollow and false illusions. By realizing the falsity of these illusions, he has come to accept that there is no cohesive theme or singular great narrative underwriting his life. Instead, there are only the pieces which form the poem. While throughout the text Yeats regrets the missed opportunities of his younger years, he has finally discovered the true nature of inspiration that is hidden by a facade of beauty. And this is why the poem still holds relevance within today's society, as it underscores timeless elements of the human condition, exploring the inescapable reality of old age and death, while calling us to recognize the true ugly nature of humanity and society from which all great ideas and creations stem. Thanks, Yeats, for your literary contribution, and as always, see you next time. Oh, I thought these were cooked.